In the heart of medieval Europe, winters were long, cold, and often merciless. The wind would whistle through narrow streets, carrying with it the icy breath of distant mountains, while snow would blanket villages, muffling the world in a quiet, frozen hush. For the people of that era, sleep during such harsh months was not merely a matter of comfort, it was a matter of survival. Every night brought the challenge of staying warm, of resting without succumbing to the cold, and of navigating a world without modern heating or insulated homes. Medieval homes varied widely depending on one's social status. A peasant's cottage was a small, often single-roomed structure made of wattle and daub, sometimes with a thatched roof that barely kept out the elements. Smoke from the hearth would rise through a hole in the roof, filling the room with a sooty haze, yet it was the only source of heat. Beds, if they existed in such humble dwellings, were rudimentary. Many peasants did not have raised beds at all. Instead, they would sleep on a simple pallet of straw or hay laid upon the floor, sometimes covered with rough blankets made from wool or animal hides. These early mattresses offered little insulation from the cold stone or earthen floors, so families often huddled together, using body heat as a natural means of warmth. In wealthier households, such as those of merchants or minor nobility, sleeping arrangements are markedly different. A well-to-do family might have a chamber separate from the main living space, where the bed could be elevated on wooden frames, stuffed with feathers or down if affordable. Heavy curtains would surround the bed, not just for privacy, but also to trap heat and shield occupants from drafts. Wealthy medieval people understood the importance of layering in winter. Linen sheets were often covered with woolen blankets, and fur pelts were laid on top to provide extra warmth. Even then, nights were chilly, and it was common to see extra measures, such as warming the bed with hot stones or using foot stoves, small metal containers, filled with embers to keep extremities from freezing. Communal sleeping was another adaptation to the harsh winters. In smaller villages, it was not unusual for several family members to share a single bed. Parents might sleep with children, sometimes even with older siblings, not merely for closeness, but to conserve heat. In some regions, villagers would sleep in the same room, where animals such as pigs, chickens, or dogs might be kept for the night. Though the presence of animals was not particularly pleasant by modern standards, their bodies generated warmth that helped keep humans from shivering through the night. The medieval night itself was dictated by the natural rhythms of the day. Without artificial light, people generally went to bed shortly after sunset. Candles were expensive, and lamps required oil, so prolonged wakefulness at night was a luxury few could afford. In the dead of winter, nights were longer, and the cold often made it difficult to sleep deeply. Families would gather near the hearth, telling stories or murmuring prayers to ward off nightmares or the imagined spirits that prowled in the darkness. The fire served not just as a source of heat, but as a psychological comfort, a flickering shield against the fears that accompanied long, cold nights. Clothing was central to surviving winter sleep. Even in bed, medieval people did not undress fully. A nightshirt, often made of linen or wool, would be worn, sometimes with layers of undergarments. Wealthier individuals might don fur-lined slippers or socks, while the poorest might wrap their feet in cloth or straw to keep from freezing. Headwear, such as caps or hoods, was common, for it was believed that keeping the head covered helped retain body heat, especially during icy nights. Medieval people were also keenly aware of the dangers of exposure. Illnesses such as pneumonia or frostbite were common, and the winter months could be deadly, especially for children and the elderly. Some communities developed routines to minimize these risks. Fires would be tended late into the night, and sometimes small metal or clay pots filled with hot coals were placed under blankets to provide localized warmth. Homes might be insulated as best as possible with tapestries, hanging furs, or rushes on the floor to reduce drafts. These methods were crude, yet they were the difference between a restless, freezing night and a night that allowed for actual rest. The architecture of medieval homes also played a subtle role in sleep patterns. In castles or manor houses, the thick stone walls could retain a surprising amount of heat during the day, slowly releasing it at night. Large hearths in central halls not only provided warmth, but created a gentle, radiating heat that reached even the private chambers. In peasant homes, however, heat rarely traveled far from the hearth. A small stove or fireplace might warm one corner, leaving the rest of the room cold. This disparity meant that medieval people developed strategies, such as moving their sleeping pallets closer to the fire, or stacking hay and straw around them to create a microclimate of warmth. Food also influenced sleep. In winter, hearty meals were essential, not just for nutrition, but for generating body heat. A warm porridge, stew, or broth before bed could help the body maintain warmth through the night. In some regions, spices like cinnamon or cloves were added to drinks or foods, not only for flavor, but because they were believed to increase internal heat. Alcohol, though sometimes used, was a double-edged sword. While it could create a sensation of warmth, it often led to disrupted sleep and increased vulnerability to the cold. Sleep in the medieval era was punctuated by the realities of daily life. Nighttime was rarely a full, uninterrupted 8 hours. People would wake to tend fires, check on animals, or respond to any dangers that threatened the household. In rural areas, the sounds of wolves or other predators could lead to sudden awakenings, while in towns, the cold streets and lack of secure doors meant that vigilance was necessary even during sleep. The medieval night was both a time of rest and a time of careful survival. Even in the wealthiest households, sleep was approached with caution. Superstitions abounded, often tied to the perils of the dark winter night. People would place iron objects near the bed to ward off evil spirits or hang herbs to purify the air. Religious rituals were common. Prayers, blessings, and protective charms might be used to ensure that the household remained safe through the long, frozen hours. Sleep was not merely a physical necessity. It was imbued with a spiritual and protective dimension. Yet despite these hardships, medieval people adapted in remarkable ways. They developed customs, tools, and routines to cope with the relentless cold. Waking up in the morning, they were often greeted by frost-covered floors, frozen water jugs, and a world hushed by snow. Yet the warmth they had managed to retain through the night, whether through layers of clothing, shared body heat, or the glow of a hearth, was a testament to human ingenuity in the face of adversity. Sleep, even in the harshest of winters, became a survival strategy, a time of rest carefully negotiated against the ever-present cold. In some regions, seasonal sleeping arrangements became a way of life. In Scandinavia, for instance, the long polar nights meant that people adjusted their routines dramatically. Winter bedding was heavier, rooms were shared more frequently, and daytime activity often synchronized with the brief hours of sunlight. In the British Isles, winter storms could isolate villages, leading families to reinforce their homes and sleeping quarters with additional insulation, straw, and furs. The medieval world was not uniform, but across Europe, one fact remained constant. Winter sleep demanded ingenuity, adaptation, and a profound understanding of one's environment. As the centuries progressed, small technological improvements slowly emerged. The development of more sophisticated bedding, better insulation techniques, and the gradual use of chimneys in homes allowed for slightly warmer nights. Yet for the majority of medieval people, winter sleep remained a challenge, a negotiation between body and environment, and a constant awareness of the cold that pressed against walls and windows. By understanding the ways medieval people slept during harsh winters, we gain insight not only into their daily lives, but also into the resilience and creativity that allowed humans to endure seasons of extreme hardship. Their strategies layering, communal sleeping, careful attention to heat sources, and even spiritual precautions reveal a world in which sleep was a conscious, managed activity, not a passive state. It was a time when every blanket, every ember, and every shared body heat played a vital role in surviving the long, cold nights. In the dim glow of medieval hearths, winter nights stretched long and unbroken, demanding ingenuity from those who sought even a few hours of warmth and rest. Beyond the basic layers of clothing and shared sleeping arrangements, people devised a variety of creative solutions to make the cold more bearable. One such practice was the use of bed warmers. These were metal pans, often filled with hot coals or heated stones, which could be slid between the sheets before bedtime. The warmth radiated slowly, allowing the sleeper to enter the bed with a comforting heat that warded off the immediate chill. For wealthier households, bed warmers were sometimes elaborately designed, featuring ornate metalwork, while poorer families might rely on simple clay or iron containers. Regardless of style, the goal remained the same: a brief, precious barrier against the winter cold. Medieval bedding itself was a subject of careful attention. While straw and hay were common for the lower classes, those who could afford it used feather mattresses, known as tick beds. These mattresses, sewn from linen or wool and stuffed with down or feathers, provided insulation far superior to straw. Blankets of wool or furs were layered on top, and in some cases, tapestries or curtains surrounded the bed to trap heat. Wealthier families even hung heavy draperies around windows, creating an additional buffer against drafts. In monasteries or abbeys, where communal sleeping was common, monks often had narrow wooden beds lined with rushes. But they too recognized the value of warmth, layering blankets and furs when the temperatures dropped. One of the remarkable adaptations in winter sleeping practices was the role of the fireplace. In castles and manorial homes, the hearth was not merely a cooking area, but the central source of life and warmth. Fireplaces were strategically placed in halls, kitchens, and chambers, with chimneys designed to draw smoke out while maximizing heat retention. Large stone hearths radiated warmth that could reach even distant corners of a room, though it was often uneven. As a result, medieval people became highly strategic about positioning their beds relative to the fire, seeking the warmest spots while avoiding smoke. In smaller cottages, a central hearth might be the only source of heat, and families learned to huddle around it during waking hours and to move their sleeping pallets closer at night. Sleeping in such close proximity to the hearth had its challenges. Smoke could irritate eyes and lungs, and embers posed a fire hazard, yet the warmth they provided outweighed the risks. People also developed simple tools to manage fire more safely. Iron and clay containers allowed embers to be moved and managed, while small screens or doors for the fireplace helped direct heat into living spaces. Even in monasteries, where strict rules governed behavior, careful tending of fires was essential, particularly in winter, when cold could lead to illness or even death. The social aspect of sleep during winter was as important as the physical. In crowded cottages, barns, and manorial halls, sleeping arrangements reflected both necessity and hierarchy. The master of the house and immediate family would occupy the best beds, often elevated and insulated, while servants or apprentices slept on pallets of straw on the floor. In monasteries, sleeping was communal, and silence was observed to respect others' rest. Even so, warmth was communal as well. Monks might huddle together or share blankets during particularly harsh nights, relying on body heat as a critical supplement to fire. Medieval people were deeply aware of the dangers posed by cold, not only to comfort but to health. Illnesses like hypothermia and frostbite were common, and the cold could exacerbate other diseases such as pneumonia or rheumatism. The elderly and young children were especially vulnerable. Families often implemented nighttime routines to protect these numbers, using additional blankets, placing them closer to fires, or even sleeping in partial shifts to ensure someone remained awake to tend the hearth. The awareness of these risks was embedded in daily life. Winter was a season of caution, not leisure. Food and drink played a surprisingly significant role in preparing for winter sleep. Warm broths, porridges, and stews helped generate internal heat, while hot drinks, sometimes spiced with cinnamon, cloves, or ginger, were believed to improve circulation and ward off cold. In wealthier households, mulled wine or ale was common, offering temporary warmth, though the effects were short-lived. The timing of meals was also strategic. A warm evening meal allowed the body to retain heat through the initial hours of sleep, and leftovers were sometimes used to feed animals in the same space, further adding to the warmth through their body heat. Clothing at night was not just practical, but also a reflection of medieval beliefs. Linen nightshirts, woolen cloaks, and fur-lined caps were common. In some regions, people believed that certain fabrics or colors could protect against illness or evil spirits that prowled in the darkness. Socks or slippers were essential, as cold feet were thought not only to be uncomfortable, but also to invite disease. Layering was universal, with even the poorest attempting to combine whatever materials they had. Scraps of cloth, woolen garments, and animal hides formed improvised blankets and clothing, making each bed a patchwork of warmth. Medieval medicine and folklore often intertwined with these sleeping practices. Certain herbs were placed under pillows or near beds, believed to protect sleepers from nightmares, illness, or malevolent spirits. Tansy, rue, and lavender were among the more common plants, used for their aromatic properties and perceived magical benefits. In wealthier households, prayers, amulets, or charms might accompany these botanical safeguards. Sleeping was thus not purely physical, but also spiritual, with people taking precautions to protect both body and soul from the harsh realities of winter. The architecture of castles and manor houses further shaped sleeping habits. Thick stone walls, while cold to the touch, had thermal mass, absorbing heat from the day's fires and releasing it slowly at night. Large chambers could be cold, but hanging tapestries, furs, and curtains created insulated microclimates. Bed alcoves, known as closets in some regions, provided semi-enclosed sleeping spaces, protecting sleepers from drafts while retaining warmth. Even the placement of windows and doors was deliberate. Smaller windows, shutters, and strategic doorways reduced heat loss, and the careful arrangement of furniture helped manage airflow. In villages and towns, where resources were scarcer, people improvised continuously. Straw or rushes were layered thicker in winter, sometimes replaced weekly to prevent dampness, which could quickly sap warmth. Windows might be covered with oiled parchment or cloth to reduce drafts. Communities developed shared knowledge about these practices, passing them down through generations. Advice such as sleeping with one's back to the wall, keeping feet covered, and avoiding sudden exposure to cold air became common wisdom, codified in household manuals and oral traditions. Winter nights also influenced sleep patterns. Without artificial light, people largely followed the rhythm of the sun. In the shortest days of winter, it was not unusual for medieval people to wake in the middle of the night and then return to sleep before dawn. These segmented sleep patterns allowed families to tend fires, check animals, or perform small chores, while also giving the body time to rest in manageable intervals. Scholars have noted that this biphasic or polyphasic sleep was not uncomfortable for medieval people. It was a natural adaptation to the environment, intertwined with household routines and seasonal necessities. Even in castles, where wealth provided some comfort, the cold could be inescapable. Royal and noble chambers were often high and exposed to the elements. Fireplaces provided warmth, but drafts could creep along stone walls, and heavy tapestries were essential for insulation. Nobility often slept in multiple layers of bedding, including feather-stuffed mattresses, blankets, and fur covers. In some cases, servants would keep fires stoked through the night, moving hot coals into small containers that could be placed under blankets for localized heat. These measures, though elaborate, highlight that winter sleep was universally a challenge, regardless of social status. Animals continued to play a crucial role. Even in wealthier households, it was not unusual for pets or livestock to be kept near sleeping areas. Dogs provided warmth and security, while larger animals in barns or adjacent rooms contributed body heat that helped mitigate the harsh chill. The relationship between humans and animals in this context was practical as much as emotional, creating an ecosystem of warmth that supported survival during the longest nights. In rural areas, winter also dictated sleeping arrangements outdoors or in auxiliary spaces. Seasonal workers, shepherds, and travelers sometimes had to sleep in barns, lean-tos, or under rudimentary shelters. Straw, hay, and animal hides were essential tools, and fires were managed with extreme care. Exposure was constant, and those who traveled during winter understood that survival depended on careful preparation. Layered clothing, shared warmth, and strategic placement near fires were all necessary for enduring nights in the open air. The cultural aspect of winter sleep also shaped daily life. Folk tales, superstitions, and songs were part of the bedtime ritual, serving to calm children and provide a sense of security. Stories of spirits, witches, and other supernatural beings were common, particularly in long, dark nights. Prayers and rituals were often performed before sleep, blending practical concern with spiritual protection. The medieval night was thus a combination of physical endurance, careful planning, and a layer of cultural and spiritual mindfulness, all aimed at negotiating the harsh winter environment. As winter deepened, the diversity of sleeping practices across medieval Europe became increasingly apparent. Geography, social class, and local resources all played a critical role in how people survived the long, freezing nights. In the colder regions of Scandinavia, Iceland, and northern Britain, people faced months of near-constant darkness, bitter winds, and snow that could accumulate in drifts taller than the average person. Villagers adapted in remarkable ways, often constructing homes partially underground or with thick timber walls to retain heat. Sleeping areas were often communal, with entire families and sometimes extended kin sharing the same space to conserve body warmth. The sleeping pallet might consist of multiple layers of straw, moss, and wool, all carefully arranged to create insulation from the frigid floor. In these northern regions, people developed seasonal strategies that were woven into daily life. During the harshest months, meals were prepared with the specific goal of sustaining energy and warmth through the night. Porridges and stews were thick and calorie-dense, often spiced with imported cinnamon, cloves, or locally grown herbs like juniper berries, which were believed to stimulate circulation and warmth. These foods were consumed just before bedtime, giving the body a steady source of heat while it rested. The positioning of the sleeping area near the hearth was critical. Families would even rotate sleeping arrangements, ensuring that everyone had access to the warmest spot at some point during the night. Castles and manor houses in northern regions presented a different set of challenges and solutions. Large stone halls, while imposing and sturdy, often retained cold due to their size and high ceilings. Fireplaces were central, but the heat they provided was uneven. Beds were strategically placed near the hearth, sometimes with footstools or benches that could hold heated coals to keep extremities warm. Curtains around the bed, known as bed hangings, were both decorative and functional, forming a barrier against drafts. In wealthier households, attendants or servants were assigned to stoke fires throughout the night, ensuring that the warmth never completely waned. Even with these measures, winter sleep in a castle was not luxurious. The chill could still creep into poorly insulated corners, and night clothes were worn in multiple layers. In southern Europe, winters were milder, but still posed challenges. Houses in France, Italy, and Spain were often made of stone or brick, which retained heat more effectively than timber. The challenge here was less about enduring extreme cold and more about maintaining comfort throughout the long nights. Wealthy households enjoyed feather mattresses, layered blankets, and furs, while the poorer population relied on rushes, straw, or simple wool coverings. Communal sleeping was still common among peasants, particularly in smaller villages where space was limited. Here, too, animals were often part of the sleeping arrangement, providing warmth and companionship through the night. Monastic life offers a particularly fascinating glimpse into winter sleep practices. Monks and nuns, bound by strict routines and vows, had to maintain regular sleep schedules despite the harsh conditions. In monasteries, sleeping quarters were communal, with rows of simple wooden beds or pallets of rushes. Silence was observed, and minimal clothing was worn, as austerity was a spiritual practice. Yet the cold could be intense, particularly in stone-built monasteries without chimneys or fireplaces in individual cells. Some monastic orders encouraged layering blankets or sharing warmth in subtle ways, though physical contact was limited by religious rules. Heating devices were rare. The emphasis was on endurance, meditation, and spiritual focus as a means to cope with discomfort. Children and infants presented unique challenges in winter sleep. In most medieval households, children shared beds with parents or older siblings, not merely for warmth, but also for protection. Infants were often swaddled in layers of linen or wool, and older children might have their own small pallets placed near the fire. Wet or soiled bedding was a constant concern, as cleaning options were limited during winter. Families improvised, using straw, rushes, and cloth to replace or cover damp layers. Despite these challenges, the priority was always warmth. A cold child risked illness or death, and families developed careful routines to ensure that the youngest members were shielded from the worst of winter-rest chill. The sensory experience of sleeping in medieval winter was also markedly different from today. Nights were long, quiet, and dark, broken only by the occasional crackle of the hearth or the distant howl of wolves. The smell of smoke, burning wood, and animal hides was pervasive, forming a backdrop that medieval people would have considered normal. Cold air could seep through gaps in walls or windows, making the warmth of a layered bed feel precious. In larger towns, the din of night watchmen, barking dogs, and wind against timber-bird walls added a layer of ambient sound that punctuated sleep. This environment required adaptation. People learned to sleep lightly or in shifts, waking briefly to tend fires, check animals, or adjust bedding. Health considerations were central to winter sleep. Medieval physicians understood, at least intuitively, that exposure to cold could exacerbate illness. Herbs, poultices, and hot drinks were part of nightly routines aimed at maintaining health. Certain herbs, such as thyme, rosemary, and sage, were thought to ward off colds and improve circulation. Nighttime routines could include drinking hot herbal infusions, wrapping oneself in additional layers, and placing heated stones or coals near the bed. Although medical knowledge was limited compared to today, the combination of practical and folk remedies allowed people to endure the winter months with remarkable resilience. Fire management was crucial for survival. In wealthier homes, large hearths required constant tending, and servants often worked in shifts to keep fires burning through the night. In cottages, smaller fires were carefully monitored, and coals or embers were used strategically to retain heat. Metal containers, such as cauldrons or pans, allowed embers to be moved into bedding areas or near sleeping outlets without causing accidents. Even in monasteries, where spiritual life took precedence, fires were maintained in communal spaces to ensure that occupants could remain warm enough to function during night vigils and early morning prayers. The physical construction of beds evolved with necessity. Bed frames were often raised, keeping sleepers off the cold floor. Straw, hay, moss, and feathers were layered to provide insulation, and furs added both warmth and comfort. Wealthy families sometimes placed a mattress atop another, creating a double layer that preserved heat more effectively. The use of curtains or canopies around the bed was both aesthetic and functional. Heavy fabric trapped body heat and reduced the intrusion of drafts. Even small details, such as the placement of pillows, were considered for their warmth retention properties. A pillow could be used to shield the head or torso from cold air. Cultural practices influenced winter sleep in subtle but important ways. Storytelling, prayers, and songs before bed served to create a sense of security. Nighttime was filled with beliefs about spirits, witches, and supernatural dangers that prowled the darkness. Protective rituals were common. Charms under pillows, iron objects near the bed, or herbs hung in windows were thought to safeguard sleep. These practices highlight that medieval people approached sleep not only as a physical necessity, but as a time when the spiritual and physical realms intersected. Sleep was carefully negotiated, with measures to protect both body and soul. Winter also imposed seasonal adaptations beyond bedding and clothing. People became acutely aware of ventilation and drafts, using tapestries, cloth, and furniture to control airflow. Windows were often shuttered or covered with oiled parchment, reducing heat loss while allowing minimal light. Doors were strategically closed, and rooms were arranged to retain warmth near sleeping areas. Even floors might be insulated with additional layers of straw or rushes. These adaptations were practical, learned through observation and experience, and passed down across generations. Travelers and pilgrims faced even greater challenges. Those journeying during winter months often slept in inns, monasteries, or barns, where conditions were unpredictable. Bedding might be shared, scarce, or improvised, and fires could be limited. Travelers learned to layer clothing, huddle with companions, and position themselves near animals or hearths to survive the night. These experiences highlight that medieval sleep was not uniform. It was shaped profoundly by social status, location, and available resources. Regional variations continued to influence sleep practices. In alpine regions, homes were often built with thick stone or timber, and bedding was adapted to high altitudes and low temperatures. In coastal regions, maritime communities dealt with damp cold and strong winds, insulating beds with furs and straw and positioning them away from drafty walls. In Central European villages, communal barns and shared living spaces dictated that warmth was negotiated socially, with sleeping arrangements reflecting cooperation as much as family structure. Despite these challenges, medieval people demonstrated remarkable adaptability. They developed tools, routines, and social practices that allowed them to endure the harshest months. Winter sleep was not merely a period of rest. It was a carefully orchestrated interplay of clothing, bedding, fire, food, and social interaction. Every layer of clothing, every curtain, every ember in the fire contributed to survival, revealing a world in which sleep was deeply intentional. In the grand halls of medieval castles, winter nights demanded a delicate balance between comfort, practicality, and social hierarchy. Castles, built for defense, were formidable structures of stone and timber, often cold and drafty despite their size. Nobility had access to the best sleeping arrangements available, yet even their nights were subject to the chill that seeped through walls and ceilings. High ceilings, large windows, and thick stone walls made for a majestic environment, but they also created challenges for retaining heat. Fireplaces were the primary source of warmth, their flickering flames illuminating tapestries, furniture, and the elaborate bedding that reflected the status of those who slept within. Beds in noble households were often raised on wooden frames and layered with mattresses, blankets, and furs. The wealthiest families had feather-stuffed mattresses, known as tick beds, and could afford multiple layers of blankets and fur covers. Canopies and heavy draperies surrounded the bed, not only providing privacy, but also trapping heat and creating a small microclimate within the room. Footstools or benches sometimes held heated coals or stones, offering localized warmth for feet and extremities. Nobility also utilized bed warmers, metal pans filled with hot coals, which could be carefully placed beneath blankets before retiring for the night. Even with these elaborate measures, the cold was never entirely banished. Noble families often relied on attendants or servants to stoke fires throughout the night, ensuring that hearths remained lit. These attendants would move embers into bed warmers, add logs to the fire, and adjust bedding to optimize warmth. Sleep was a carefully managed activity, a nightly routine that combined physical preparation, social coordination, and meticulous attention to detail. Nobility understood that the discomfort of cold could disturb rest and impair health, making these nightly strategies essential for survival. In contrast, the servants and lower-ranking members of a castle household faced harsher realities. Their sleeping quarters were often smaller rooms, attics, or even open spaces within the Great Hall. Pallets of straw or rushes provided minimal insulation, and layering was limited by available resources. Servants relied heavily on proximity to fires and shared warmth from fellow sleepers. Communal sleeping was the norm, with workers huddling together to preserve body heat. While the nobility could enjoy feather beds and fur blankets, servants depended on practical ingenuity, improvised bedding, layering of simple cloths, and strategic placement near fireplaces. Peasant homes, of course, presented an even starker picture. Small, single-room cottages had limited means of retaining warmth. The hearth served as the central point of life and survival, yet its heat often failed to reach every corner. Straw and rushes were layered thickly for bedding, and blankets or animal hides were used sparingly. Families slept together in a single bed or shared pallets on the floor, relying on collective body heat to stave off the cold. Animals, often kept in adjacent spaces or even within the same room, contributed additional warmth. The boundaries between human and animal sleeping spaces were blurred by necessity, creating a symbiotic relationship that allowed survival through the harshest nights. The concept of segmented sleep or biphasic sleep was common in the medieval era. People would often sleep in two distinct phases, separated by a period of wakefulness during the night. In the deepest winter months, this pattern allowed individuals to tend fires, check on animals, or perform household tasks without risking hypothermia or exposure. Some scholars suggest that this interrupted sleep was natural and comfortable for medieval people, harmonizing with the rhythms of long nights and scarce artificial light. During these wakeful hours, family members might engage in quiet activities, prayers, or storytelling, creating a routine that blended rest, vigilance, and social cohesion. Fire management remained a central concern throughout the night. In castles and manorial homes, attendants worked shifts to ensure continuous warmth. In smaller cottages, families took turns monitoring embers, moving heated stones or coals as needed. Fire was not merely a source of heat, but a lifeline. Without it, the cold could quickly become dangerous, particularly for the elderly, young children, or the sick. The placement of fire pits, stoves, and embers was a careful art, balancing safety, efficiency, and comfort. Even monasteries, where spiritual austerity took precedence, prioritized warmth in communal spaces, recognizing that extreme cold could interfere with meditation, prayer, and ritual duties. Beyond physical warmth, cultural and spiritual practices intertwined with sleep. The long, dark winter nights were filled with stories of spirits, witches, and supernatural forces. People believed that sleep could be disrupted by malevolent entities, and so charms, herbs, and prayers were commonly employed to ensure safe rest. Tansy, rue, lavender, and other aromatic herbs were placed under pillows or hung from ceilings to protect against nightmares or illness. Iron objects near beds were thought to ward off spirits, and some households recited prayers before sleep to shield both body and soul. Sleep was thus both a practical and spiritual endeavor, requiring attention to physical, social, and metaphysical concerns. Winter clothing for sleep reflected a blend of necessity and knowledge. Nightshirts, woolen cloaks, caps, and socks were layered to conserve heat. Wealthier households could afford specialized garments, such as fur-lined slippers or thick wool undergarments. In peasant households, layers were improvised from whatever materials were available: scraps of cloth, additional bedding, or animal hides. Covering the head was considered particularly important, as it was believed that heat loss from the head could rapidly chill the body. Even sleeping positions were adjusted for warmth, with curled postures and strategic placement of limbs under blankets or against other bodies, maximizing shared heat. The architecture of sleeping spaces in castles and homes was deliberately designed to aid warmth retention. Alcoves, closets, or enclosed bedchambers reduced drafts and trapped heat. Heavy tapestries hung from walls and ceilings, providing insulation while also serving decorative purposes. Windows were often small, with shutters or oiled parchment coverings to reduce heat loss. Furniture placement was strategic, creating barriers against cold air. Floors might be covered with straw, rushes, or tapestries, insulating occupants from the chill that radiated from stone foundations. These architectural details reflect a sophisticated understanding of microclimate management within the home. Children and infants were given particular attention. Swaddling, layering, and proximity to adults were standard practices. Families understood that the young were more vulnerable to cold and took extra measures to protect them. Nighttime routines for children often included warm drinks, herbal infusions, or additional bedding. Older siblings might huddle with younger ones, sharing warmth and offering protection. In monasteries and convents, similar attention was given to young novices, balancing spiritual discipline with practical needs for survival. Food continued to play a central role in winter sleep. Hearty stews, porridge, and broth provided sustenance and warmth, while herbs and spices were believed to improve circulation and stave off colds. Timing of meals was strategic. A warm evening meal allowed the body to retain heat through initial sleep, while leftover food could be fed to animals, adding warmth through their presence in shared sleeping spaces. Even small gestures, such as adding a pinch of spice to a meal, were part of a broader understanding of seasonal survival. Monastic communities displayed unique adaptations. In cold stone buildings, monks and nuns slept on wooden pallets or rush beds, often with minimal clothing. Silence was observed, and communal sleeping arrangements emphasized discipline and endurance. Heating was communal, with fires tended in central spaces and shared blankets or furs used sparingly to maintain warmth. These austere routines highlight a different approach to winter sleep, one focused on spiritual resilience and the capacity to endure discomfort as a form of devotion. In rural villages, where resources were scarce, ingenuity was essential. Bedding materials were layered, rotated, and replaced to maintain insulation. Homes were arranged to trap warmth near sleeping areas, with furniture and tapestries acting as barriers against drafts. Windows were shuttered or covered with cloth, and doors were closed strategically to retain heat. Even small adjustments, such as moving pallets closer to walls or adding extra straw to floors, could make the difference between a tolerable night and a perilous one. Travelers faced extreme challenges. Inns, barns, and temporary shelters offered minimal comfort. Bedding was shared, sparse, or improvised, and fires were limited. Travelers relied on clothing layers, huddling for warmth, and strategic placement near hearths or animals. These nights tested endurance and highlighted the centrality of warmth in medieval survival strategies. For travelers, winter sleep was a calculated negotiation with the environment, relying on experience, resourcefulness, and adaptation. The sensory experience of medieval winter sleep was unique. Nights were long and quiet, punctuated by the crackle of fires, the sounds of animals, or the distant howl of wolves. Smoke, the scent of wood, and animal odors filled the air, creating an atmosphere that modern observers might find strange. Cold air seeped through gaps, making warmth precious. People learned to sleep lightly, awaken briefly, and adjust bedding or fires as needed. These patterns reflect a deep adaptation to environmental conditions, showing how medieval people integrated physical, social, and practical knowledge into nightly rest. Winter sleep also involved subtle social negotiations. In crowded cottages or shared sleeping areas, space and warmth had to be managed carefully. Families coordinated sleeping positions, layering arrangements, and proximity to fires. Animals were part of this social ecosystem, contributing heat while requiring care and management. Even in monasteries or noble households, the allocation of warmth reflected hierarchy, status, and necessity, demonstrating how sleep was intertwined with social structure. Finally, the mental and spiritual dimension of winter sleep cannot be overstated. Darkness, isolation, and the threat of illness or danger made rest a conscious endeavor. Prayers, protective charms, and rituals were integrated into nightly routines, reflecting the belief that sleep was not merely physical, but also spiritual. The medieval night was a time of vigilance as much as rest, a period in which careful planning, cultural practices, and shared warmth ensured survival through the harshest months. Medieval people were remarkably inventive when it came to surviving the long, harsh winters, and this ingenuity extended into the realm of sleep. Beyond beds, blankets, and fires, small innovations and household strategies made a profound difference. One such method was the use of insulated bed boxes or chambers within rooms. Wealthier families sometimes constructed small, enclosed sleeping areas within their chambers, lined with tapestries or cloth to trap warmth. These bed closets allowed occupants to retain heat more effectively, creating a microclimate within a room that could otherwise be frigid. In cottages, makeshift barriers made of straw, rushes, or blankets served a similar purpose, providing a buffer against drafts and retaining body heat during the long nights. Another notable practice was the strategic placement of animals. Dogs, cats, and even larger livestock were kept near sleeping areas. The warmth of their bodies was a practical supplement to fires and bedding. In rural villages, it was common for pigs, goats, or chickens to spend the night in an attached barn or even in the same room as humans, not merely for warmth, but also for security and convenience. This close proximity to animals required careful management, balancing the benefits of shared heat with the hygiene and safety challenges inherent in cohabitation. Medical beliefs of the medieval period also shaped winter sleep. Physicians and herbalists understood, at least partially, the dangers of prolonged exposure to cold. They recommended layering clothing and bedding, using herbs and spices to stimulate circulation, and avoiding sudden exposure to frigid air. Certain plants, such as rue, lavender, and rosemary, were placed under pillows or in sleeping areas, thought to ward off illness and protect against nocturnal spirits. In wealthier households, small pillows filled with aromatic herbs were common, providing both fragrance and comfort. These practices reveal a subtle blending of practical health measures and spiritual protection. Hearths remained central to medieval winter sleep. The management of fire was an art form, particularly in large households and castles. Servants rotated through shifts, adding logs and embers to maintain a steady heat. Hearths were often lined with iron to reflect heat into the room, and small devices, such as cauldrons or pans, were used to transport embers safely to bedding areas. In peasant homes, fire management was a continuous concern. Families ensured that coals did not die out completely overnight, using stones, bricks, or clay containers to retain warmth for extended periods. Fire was not simply a comfort, it was essential for survival, and sleep depended upon it. Clothing and bedding choices were intimately linked with social status. Nobility had access to multiple layers of linen, wool, and furs, as well as specialized nightwear, such as fur-lined caps and slippers. Peasants relied on improvised solutions, layers of cloth, extra straw, or shared blankets. Even small adjustments, such as curling the body or covering the head, were deliberate methods of heat retention. Footwear during sleep was common in colder regions, with socks or fur coverings helping to prevent the rapid loss of heat through extremities. These strategies reflect an acute understanding of how the human body loses warmth and the importance of counteracting that loss during long winter nights. Superstitions and folklore intertwined seamlessly with these practical measures. Darkness and isolation encouraged belief in spirits, witches, and other supernatural dangers. Protective measures were woven into daily life. Charms under pillows, iron objects near beds, and prayers recited before sleep were all part of a cultural system designed to safeguard both body and spirit. Nighttime was considered a liminal space, a time when vigilance was as important as rest. Medieval people prepared not only for the cold, but also for imagined threats, blending survival with ritualized practice. Winter sleep was further influenced by seasonal cycles and light patterns. In the far north, nights could last nearly 20 hours, while in Central Europe, short winter days meant extended darkness. Medieval sleep adapted accordingly. People often followed biphasic or segmented sleep patterns, sleeping for a few hours, waking briefly for household tasks, prayers, or fire tending, and returning to rest before dawn. These patterns were not considered unusual. They were natural adaptations to environmental conditions and the rhythms of daily life. The long nights encouraged creativity, meditation, and communal interaction before the return to slumber. In noble households, the winter bedroom was a carefully orchestrated environment. Feathers, wool, and furs were layered meticulously, with bed curtains enclosing the sleeper. Attendants monitored fires, repositioned heated stones, and adjusted bedding as necessary. Pillows and bolsters were strategically placed to insulate vulnerable areas, while footstools sometimes held embers to warm the feet. Even simple gestures, such as sharing body heat with a spouse or child, were part of an elaborate system of warmth preservation. The combination of material wealth, architectural design, and careful planning allowed nobility to achieve a level of comfort unimaginable to peasants, though even they were subject to the pervasive chill of stone walls and winter winds. For peasants, the reality was far more challenging. Homes were smaller, fires weaker, and bedding more rudimentary. Sleeping in shared pallets, often on earthen floors, they relied heavily on collective body heat. Animal presence was a necessity rather than a luxury. Straw, rushes, and animal hides created layers of insulation, while windows and doors were tightly closed or covered to minimize drafts. Nighttime routines involved moving embers, tending fires, and ensuring that younger or weaker family members were positioned near the warmest areas. The struggle against cold was constant, and sleep was never entirely free of discomfort. Monastic communities approached winter sleep with a different set of priorities. Minimalist beds, wooden pallets, and limited bedding reflected a spiritual commitment to austerity. Yet even here, practical measures were necessary. Communal warmth, strategic use of fires, and occasional layering of blankets or furs allowed monks and nuns to endure the cold. Silence and discipline structured sleep, while segmented sleep accommodated night prayers and meditation. Even in the harshest environments, the combination of routine, endurance, and practical ingenuity ensured that rest could be obtained. Food, too, played a central role in winter sleep. A warm evening meal provided energy and internal warmth. Thick porridges, stews, and broths were staples, often spiced with herbs or imported seasonings to aid circulation. Timing was crucial. Eating too early could leave the body cold before bedtime, while eating too late could disrupt digestion and sleep. Leftovers fed animals, enhancing warmth through their proximity. These practices highlight how medieval people integrated nutrition, heat management, and daily routine into a coherent strategy for surviving winter nights. Travelers and pilgrims faced extreme conditions. Inns, barns, and temporary shelters offered limited protection. Bedding was sparse, fires were shared or minimal, and nights were long. Layering clothing, huddling with companions, and strategic positioning near animals or hearths became essential survival strategies. Travel during winter was hazardous, not only due to weather, but also due to the difficulty of obtaining warmth and shelter. Those who journeyed during this season relied on a combination of preparation, improvisation, and resilience. The sensory experience of medieval winter sleep was distinct. Nights were silent, punctuated only by the crackle of fire, the rustle of straw, or the occasional howl of distant animals. Smoke, wood, and animal scents were pervasive. Cold air could infiltrate walls, floors, and ceilings, making warmth precious. People learned to sleep lightly, waking occasionally to adjust bedding, stoke fires, or attend to animals. These environmental conditions required adaptation, shaping the physical and social routines of medieval households. Social structure further influenced sleeping arrangements. In crowded cottages, communal barns, or monasteries, warmth was negotiated carefully. Family members or fellow residents coordinated sleeping positions, bedding layers, and proximity to heat sources. Even small animals were part of this system, contributing warmth while requiring care and management. Sleep was deeply social, reflecting cooperation, hierarchy, and the practical realities of shared space. Finally, winter sleep had a spiritual and psychological dimension. Darkness and cold heightened awareness of potential dangers, both natural and supernatural. Protective rituals, prayers, and charms were integrated into nightly routines, blending physical survival with cultural and spiritual beliefs. Sleep was not passive, but a carefully managed activity, where warmth, health, social coordination, and ritual practice intersected. Medieval people understood that rest in winter was a delicate balance between body, environment, and spirit, and they developed complex strategies to ensure that balance was maintained. As the deep winter months stretched on, medieval people faced not only the physical challenges of cold, but also the subtle dangers and uncertainties of the night. Darkness itself was a profound force in daily life, shaping behavior and routines. Unlike today, when artificial light extends the day, medieval nights were long, quiet, and often punctuated only by the flicker of a hearth or a lantern. In the absence of widespread lighting, people relied on routines and preparation to ensure safety and warmth while sleeping. The combination of practical survival strategies, social coordination, and cultural practices reveals a remarkable adaptability to environmental pressures. One key adaptation was the use of layered bedding and multiple mattresses. In noble households, feather-stuffed tick beds were often topped with thick blankets and furs, creating an insulated haven within the cold stone chambers. Canopies or bed curtains were drawn tightly, forming an enclosed space that reduced drafts and trapped body heat. In rural homes, similar effects were achieved with simpler means. Layers of straw, rushes, and cloth were arranged carefully, sometimes rotated or replaced weekly to maintain insulation. Animal hides were added wherever possible, offering additional warmth. These practical strategies were essential to surviving nights when temperatures could plummet below freezing. Sleeping arrangements also reflected social structure and hierarchy. In castles and manorial homes, the nobility enjoyed the most insulated and strategically placed beds, closest to fireplaces or heated areas. Servants and lower-ranking members of the household slept in less insulated spaces, often sharing rooms or sleeping pallets. In peasant homes, entire families huddled together on a single bed or a few shared pallets, with body heat serving as a primary source of warmth. Even within these arrangements, practical considerations governed placement. Children and the elderly were positioned nearest the fire or under the warmest layers, while adults absorbed and shared heat with those around them. Animals played an indispensable role in medieval winter sleep. Dogs, cats, and livestock contributed warmth, and their presence also offered security. In rural cottages, animals were often kept in the same room as humans, or in connected barns, creating a shared ecosystem of heat. This proximity, while practical, required careful management to prevent hygiene issues and maintain a healthy environment. The presence of animals highlights the deeply intertwined relationship between humans and their surroundings, where survival depended on both adaptation and cooperation with nature. Monastic communities faced unique challenges in winter. Cold stone buildings, austere bedding, and strict routines meant that warmth was limited. Monks and nuns slept on wooden pallets or rush beds, often with minimal clothing, and silence was observed throughout the night. Yet practical measures were still taken. Communal fires in shared spaces, layering of blankets or furs when possible, and strategic placement of beds to maximize retained heat. Monastic life emphasized endurance and spiritual discipline, with sleep being carefully regulated to accommodate night prayers, vigils, and meditative practices. Even in this austere environment, survival depended on careful attention to warmth and routine. Fire management was central to medieval winter life. In castles, servants rotated shifts to keep large hearths burning through the night. Fireplaces were often lined with iron to reflect heat, and embers could be safely moved to bed warmers or stone containers to provide localized warmth. In cottages, small fires or clay braziers were monitored closely, ensuring that heat persisted without posing a hazard. Fire was not merely a convenience. It was essential for survival. The careful handling of embers, logs, and heated stones was a nightly ritual, requiring both attention and skill. Clothing choices were equally important. Nightshirts, woolen cloaks, fur-lined caps, and socks were common, especially in wealthier households. Peasants relied on layering whatever materials were available: scraps of cloth, additional bedding, or animal hides. Covering the head and feet was particularly emphasized, as these extremities lost heat rapidly. Positioning during sleep-curled postures or limbs tucked under blankets maximized retained warmth. Such practices demonstrate an intuitive understanding of human physiology and the principles of insulation, refined over generations of experience. Folklore and superstition shaped winter sleep as much as practical measures. The darkness and cold of winter were associated with spirits, witches, and supernatural forces that could disrupt sleep or bring misfortune. Families placed charms under pillows, iron objects near beds, or herbs in sleeping areas to protect against these imagined threats. Prayers and rituals were often performed before sleep, blending spiritual and physical safety. Sleep was thus a holistic practice, encompassing warmth, health, social coordination, and spiritual protection. Winter nutrition played a critical role in preparing for sleep. Hearty evening meals, such as thick stews, porridges, and broths, provided internal warmth and sustained energy. Herbs and spices were sometimes added to stimulate circulation and promote health. The timing of meals was strategic, ensuring that the body retained heat during the initial hours of rest. Leftovers were often fed to animals, contributing warmth through their presence. Nutrition, fire management, and bedding were integrated into a cohesive system for survival during the coldest months. Travelers and pilgrims faced particularly harsh conditions. Inns, barns, and temporary shelters offered limited comfort, with bedding that was often sparse or shared. Fires were minimal, and nights were long. Travelers relied on clothing layers, strategic positioning near heat sources, and huddling with companions for warmth. Their experience highlights the universality of medieval adaptation. Survival depended on preparation, ingenuity, and cooperation with the environment. Regional differences influenced winter sleeping practices as well. In Northern Europe, long nights and extreme cold required layered bedding, enclosed sleeping spaces, and strategic fire use. In Southern Europe, Milder winters allowed for lighter bedding, though fires and layered clothing remained important. Alpine communities contended with altitude and snow, often insulating beds with multiple layers of straw and animal hides. Coastal regions dealt with damp and wind, necessitating additional protective measures. Across all regions, adaptation to climate, available resources, and social structure shaped how people slept through the winter. The sensory experience of winter sleep was distinct. Nights were long, quiet, and punctuated only by the crackle of fires or distant animal sounds. Smoke, wood, and animal scents filled the air, and cold drafts crept through gaps in walls and floors. People slept lightly, waking occasionally to adjust bedding, tend fires, or check on animals. These environmental factors required continual adaptation, blending routine, vigilance, and practical ingenuity. Children and infants received special attention during winter nights. Swaddling, layering, and proximity to adults ensured warmth and protection. Nighttime routines included warm drinks, additional bedding, and strategic placement near the fire. In monastic or convent settings, young novices were similarly cared for, balancing spiritual discipline with practical survival measures. The care of the young highlights the centrality of warmth and protection in medieval family and community life. Finally, sleep was deeply intertwined with the mental and spiritual life of medieval people. Darkness, isolation, and the threat of cold or illness made rest a conscious practice. Protective rituals, prayers, and charms were woven into nightly routines, blending physical survival with spiritual protection. Sleep was not passive. It required planning, coordination, and awareness. Medieval people approached winter nights with a holistic understanding, combining practical measures, social cooperation, and cultural beliefs to navigate the harsh environment. In the most extreme climates of medieval Europe, winter sleep demanded extraordinary adaptation. The northern reaches of Scandinavia, Iceland, and the Scottish Highlands posed challenges unlike anywhere else. In these regions, darkness could stretch for nearly 20 hours, and temperatures regularly plummeted far below freezing. Survival depended not only on warmth, but on ingenuity, social cooperation, and an intimate understanding of the environment. Homes were often partially subterranean, with thick timber or stone walls providing insulation from wind and snow. Sleeping areas were carefully arranged to maximize retained heat, often in communal rooms where shared body warmth became a critical resource. Straw, moss, and rushes were layered to form insulating mattresses, sometimes topped with animal hides or thick furs. In wealthier households, feather beds offered an additional layer of comfort, but even these were supplemented with blankets and curtains. Beds were frequently raised above the floor, not only for comfort, but to escape the chill radiating from stone or earthen surfaces. Canopies and heavy draperies created enclosed microclimates, allowing warmth to accumulate around the sleeper. Every detail, from the placement of pillows to the rotation of bedding, was designed to conserve heat and reduce exposure to the bitter night air. Animals were integral to these extreme winter sleeping arrangements. Dogs, cats, and livestock often shared sleeping spaces or adjacent rooms. Their body heat contributed significantly to the overall warmth of the household. In some villages, it was common for pigs, goats, or even chickens to sleep in connected barns or directly alongside humans. While this practice presented hygiene challenges, it was a matter of survival. The presence of animals also offered security, deterring predators and signaling potential danger during the long, dark nights. Fire management remained central to survival. In large northern homes or castles, multiple hearths were maintained simultaneously, often with attendants or family members taking turns to ensure a constant supply of warmth. Embers were carefully transported in iron pans or stone containers to beds, and small braziers or fireboxes provided localized heat. Even peasant homes with only a single hearth developed ingenious strategies. Stones heated in the fire were placed near bedding. Coals were carefully conserved, and fires were tended throughout the night to prevent dangerous temperature drops. These nightly rituals required constant attention and skill, demonstrating a profound awareness of both practical survival and human physiology. Clothing for winter sleep was equally critical. In extreme northern climates, multiple layers of linen, wool, and furs were standard. Caps, socks, and cloaks were worn even during sleep, preventing heat loss through the head and extremities. Positioning was deliberate. Curled postures reduced exposed surface area, while limbs were tucked beneath layers of blankets or shared body heat. Wealthier households could afford specialized nightwear, while peasants improvised with whatever materials were available. These strategies reflect a keen understanding of insulation, heat retention, and the human body's vulnerability to cold. In castles, the challenge of winter sleep was compounded by architecture. High ceilings, large stone walls, and expansive chambers meant that even with hearths, warmth did not distribute evenly. Beds were placed strategically near fireplaces, and heavy curtains around beds created insulated enclosures. Footstools and benches might hold heated stones, while attendants rotated embers to maintain consistent heat. Nighttime activity, such as fire tending or adjusting bedding, was common, and even the nobility developed routines to cope with the persistent chill. Peasant homes, in contrast, were smaller and simpler, but no less resourceful. Communal sleeping was the norm, with entire families sharing a single bed or a few pallets. The warmth of multiple bodies was vital, and animals were often included in the sleeping space to conserve heat. Bedding consisted of straw, rushes, cloth layers, and animal hides, carefully arranged to maximize insulation. Windows were shuttered or covered with cloth, and doors were positioned to reduce drafts. Even small adjustments, like rotating bedding or adjusting body positions, could mean the difference between a tolerable night and a dangerous exposure to cold. Monastic life in extreme climates emphasized endurance alongside practical measures. Wooden pallets or rush beds were standard, and layering of blankets or furs occurred only when absolutely necessary. Fires were maintained in communal spaces, and strategic bed placement near these heat sources allowed for minimal comfort without violating austerity. Nighttime prayers and vigils required some members to be awake during the coldest hours, yet practical measures, such as shared blankets or rotating warmth, ensured survival. The combination of discipline, routine, and ingenuity allowed monasteries to thrive even in severe winter conditions. Nutrition and hydration were closely linked to winter sleep. Warm, hearty meals provided internal heat, helping the body maintain temperature through long nights. Thick porridges, meat stews, and spiced broths were common, with herbs and seasonings believed to stimulate circulation. Meals were timed strategically to maximize comfort during sleep, while leftovers fed animals, enhancing warmth through their proximity. Even beverages, such as warm milk or herbal infusions, were employed to promote circulation and ease nighttime rest. Nutrition was thus part of a carefully orchestrated strategy, integrated with fire management, bedding, and clothing. Sleep patterns in extreme northern regions were influenced by the length of nights and days. Biphasic or segmented sleep was common, allowing people to rise briefly for fire tending, prayers, or household tasks before returning to rest. This pattern was not considered unusual. It harmonized with environmental conditions and the rhythms of daily life. Extended darkness encouraged wakefulness at intervals, and communities developed cultural and practical norms to accommodate these cycles. Children, the elderly, and the ill were positioned to receive the most warmth during both sleep phases, ensuring survival across generations. Cultural and spiritual practices were woven deeply into winter sleep routines. Darkness, isolation, and the threat of illness encouraged the use of charms, prayers, and rituals. Herbs like rue, lavender, and thyme were placed under pillows or hung near beds, believed to protect against nightmares, illness, and malevolent spirits. Iron objects were also employed for spiritual protection, reflecting the medieval belief in tangible safeguards against unseen dangers. These practices were integrated seamlessly with practical measures, showing how survival, health, and spirituality intersected in daily life. Travelers faced particular hardships in extreme climates. Inns, barns, or temporary shelters offered minimal warmth, with bedding often shared or improvised. Fires were limited, and nights were long and dark. Travelers relied on layered clothing, strategic positioning near heat sources, and the warmth of companions or animals. Preparation and adaptability were essential for survival, highlighting the universality of medieval strategies for enduring winter nights. Even the most seasoned traveler required knowledge of fire tending, bedding arrangement, and clothing to withstand the cold. Nighttime dangers extended beyond cold. Wolves, bears, and other predators posed a constant threat in rural and remote areas. Proximity to animals and strategic placement of fires were vital for safety. Villagers often kept livestock close, both for warmth and as a deterrent to predators. Bells, noise, and even guard animals served to alert occupants to potential threats. In urban areas, darkness increased the risk of crime, and communal sleeping arrangements in inns or shared housing offered protection through numbers. Awareness and vigilance were integral to medieval winter sleep. In northern castles, nighttime routines were elaborate. Attendants rotated through shifts to stoke fires, move heated stones, and adjust bedding. Peasant routines were similarly detailed, though constrained by resources. Layers of straw, rushes, and cloth were rotated, windows shuttered, and doors strategically closed. Animals were positioned to provide warmth, and family members huddled together for survival. Fire tending was continuous, requiring vigilance throughout the night. Even small actions, like adjusting bedding or repositioning sleeping companions, contributed significantly to overall warmth and safety. Monastic routines, meanwhile, balanced discipline and endurance. Nighttime vigils, prayers, and meditations required some members to remain awake, while others slept on austere pallets. Communal warmth, strategic use of fires, and careful layering allowed monks and nuns to endure cold nights without compromising spiritual discipline. Even in austere conditions, practical measures ensured that basic survival needs were met. The sensory environment of northern winter nights was intense. Silence dominated, punctuated only by the crackle of fire, wind against walls, or distant animal sounds. Smoke, wood, and animal odors filled the air, and cold drafts crept through walls, floors, and ceilings. People slept lightly, awakening occasionally to adjust bedding, tend fires, or attend to animals. This environment demanded continuous adaptation, blending practical survival strategies with routine, awareness, and community cooperation. Finally, winter sleep in extreme climates combined practicality, social coordination, and spirituality. Darkness, cold, and environmental threats required careful planning and adaptation. Layered bedding, fire management, animal warmth, clothing, nutrition, and spiritual rituals were all integrated into nightly routines. Sleep was not passive. It was a conscious, deliberate process, shaped by both the physical environment and the cultural understanding of survival. Medieval people in these regions exemplified resilience and ingenuity, crafting nightly strategies that allowed them to endure some of the harshest winters in Europe. As winter deepened across medieval Europe, the long nights shaped not only daily routines, but also the cultural and psychological life of communities. Sleep was far more than a passive activity. It was a carefully orchestrated combination of warmth, protection, health, spirituality, and social coordination. Across castles, monasteries, villages, and remote homesteads, survival during harsh winters depended on knowledge that had been passed down for generations, knowledge that combined practical experience, observation of nature, and cultural tradition. In wealthy households, the bedroom was more than just a place to sleep. It was a carefully constructed microclimate. Beds were raised on wooden frames and layered with feather mattresses, blankets, and furs. Canopies and curtains enclosed the sleeping space, providing privacy while also trapping warmth. Footstools or benches sometimes held heated stones or metal pans filled with embers to provide localized heat. These innovations were essential in stone castles, where high ceilings and large windows allowed cold air to circulate. Even the nobility relied heavily on attendants to manage fires, rotate embers, and adjust bedding throughout the night. The effort put into winter sleep reflects a sophisticated understanding of human comfort and survival, demonstrating that even the wealthiest were deeply aware of environmental challenges. Peasant households, in contrast, relied on ingenuity and social cooperation. Homes were smaller, often a single room with a central hearth. Families slept together on pallets made from straw or rushes, sometimes layered with cloth or animal hides for additional insulation. The body heat of multiple people, combined with the warmth from animals such as dogs, pigs, or chickens, created a shared thermal environment that was essential for survival. Windows and doors were carefully shuttered, and even furniture was strategically placed to block drafts. The allocation of sleeping space reflected practical considerations. Children, the elderly, and the sick were positioned nearest the fire, while stronger adults absorbed and distributed warmth throughout the room. Fire management was central to medieval winter sleep. In castles and large households, hearths were maintained continuously, with attendants rotating shifts to stoke fires, transport embers, and adjust bed warmers. Stones or metal pans heated in the fire were placed near bedding to radiate warmth throughout the night. Even in small cottages, families ensured that coals did not die out completely, placing stones or clay containers over embers to retain heat. Knowledge of fire management was a practical necessity, intertwined with social coordination and careful attention to safety. A neglected hearth could mean freezing nights or even life-threatening conditions for the most vulnerable members of a household. Clothing for sleep was another essential element in medieval winter survival. Wealthy households used multiple layers of linen, wool, and furs, including nightcaps, socks, and cloaks to retain warmth. Peasants improvised with scraps of cloth, additional bedding, or animal hides. Covering the head and feet was critical, as these extremities lost heat most rapidly. Sleep positions were carefully chosen to conserve warmth. Curled postures, limbs tucked beneath layers, and sharing body heat with family members or animals were all deliberate strategies. Even subtle adjustments, such as turning slightly or pulling blankets tighter, contributed to a measurable increase in comfort and warmth. Monastic life approached winter sleep with both austerity and pragmatism. Wooden pallets or rush beds were standard, and layering was limited. Yet monks and nuns employed practical measures where possible: communal warmth, strategic bed placement near fire sources, and careful organization of sleeping arrangements ensured endurance. Nighttime prayers, vigils, and meditation were integral to monastic routines, often requiring some members to remain awake during the coldest hours. Despite the austere conditions, monasteries adapted to winter through routine, discipline, and strategic resource management. The balance between spiritual discipline and survival created a unique perspective on sleep. It was not merely a physical necessity, but a carefully timed and intentional part of communal life. Children were especially vulnerable to cold, and care during winter nights was intensive. Swaddling, layering, and positioning near adults or fires ensured warmth. Warm drinks or herbal infusions were sometimes used, believed to support circulation and health. In monastic or convent settings, young novices were similarly protected, balancing spiritual discipline with practical measures to endure cold nights. The attention given to children highlights the centrality of warmth and protection in medieval social structures. Medical beliefs and remedies further influenced winter sleep. Physicians and herbalists recommended specific practices to prevent hypothermia, illness, and discomfort. Herbs were used both for fragrance and medicinal purposes, while dietary choices were tailored to support warmth and circulation. Bloodletting and other medical interventions, while now outdated, reflected the integration of health concerns into daily life. Sleep was understood to be restorative and critical for maintaining both physical and spiritual well-being. Winter folklore and superstition also played a major role. The darkness and isolation of long nights encouraged belief in spirits, demons, and other unseen forces. Protective measures, charms under pillows, iron objects near beds, and prayers were deeply ingrained. Even seemingly mundane objects, like herbs or amulets, were imbued with symbolic significance, blending practical, psychological, and spiritual protection. Sleep was both a physical necessity and a cultural ritual, a nightly act that intertwined human, natural, and supernatural worlds. Communal coordination enhanced survival. In peasant households, the elderly and children were strategically placed nearest to the hearth, while adults absorbed heat and positioned themselves around weaker family members. In monasteries, monks and nuns shared warmth through close sleeping arrangements, rotating positions or blankets to ensure equitable distribution. In castles, attendants monitored the comfort of household members, adjusting bedding, managing fires, and attending to animals. Winter sleep was a collaborative endeavor, demonstrating the importance of social bonds and shared knowledge in medieval survival. Finally, winter sleep shaped the rhythms of daily life. Long nights encouraged segmented sleep, with periods of wakefulness used for fire tending, prayer, storytelling, or household chores. Short winter days limited outdoor activity, making nighttime tasks essential. The interplay of sleep, work, and ritual created a structured environment where rest, warmth, and survival were inseparable. Medieval people adapted not only to cold temperatures, but also to long hours of darkness, integrating environment, culture, and social coordination into a coherent approach to survival. Winter sleep, therefore, was a complex and intentional practice. It required layering of bedding and clothing, strategic use of fire and animals, careful dietary choices, and attention to hygiene and health. Spiritual and cultural practices protected the mind and soul, while social coordination ensured equitable distribution of warmth. From castles to cottages, monasteries to inns, medieval Europeans approached winter nights with creativity, knowledge, and resilience. Every aspect of sleep was intertwined with survival, reflecting an intimate understanding of both human physiology and environmental challenges. As winter deepened, the rhythm of life in medieval Europe became inseparable from the long nights, cold temperatures, and seasonal festivals. Sleep during this period was influenced not only by practical survival needs, but also by the cultural and social fabric of the community. Festivals, religious observances, and communal gatherings often punctuated the long winter months, creating opportunities for shared warmth, storytelling, and rituals that carried both practical and symbolic significance. One of the most important seasonal influences on sleep was the winter solstice. In many parts of Europe, the solstice was celebrated with feasts, fires, and gatherings, marking the longest night of the year. Families and communities gathered around large hearths, sharing food and stories, sometimes delaying sleep until after the celebrations. Fires were kept burning throughout the night, not only for warmth, but as a symbolic gesture, warding off darkness and evil spirits. In this context, sleep became a continuation of the communal warmth and protection provided by shared fire and company. Religious observances also shaped winter sleep routines. The Advent season and Christmas celebrations involved extended vigils, late-night prayers, and communal gatherings. Monasteries maintained structured schedules of prayers, known as the canonical hours, which often required waking in the dead of night. Sleep was segmented around these spiritual obligations, with monks and nuns taking brief rest periods between services. Even in lay households, devotional practices influenced bedtime, with prayers, blessings, or ritual gestures performed before lying down. Sleep, therefore, was intertwined with both cultural and spiritual life, blending physical rest with religious discipline. Storytelling and oral traditions played a crucial role in medieval winter nights. Long, cold evenings provided the perfect setting for sharing legends, moral tales, and local folklore. Families gathered around hearths, using the fire's warmth and light to create an intimate, secure environment. Stories of heroes, spirits, and historical events entertained, instructed, and strengthened communal bonds. For children, these narratives often served as gentle lessons on morality, courage, and survival, while adults used stories to pass down practical knowledge about weather, wildlife, and winter survival strategies. In this way, storytelling contributed indirectly to sleep, preparing both body and mind for rest by fostering a sense of safety and belonging. Candlelight, lanterns, and torches were supplementary to the hearth, providing limited illumination for late-night tasks. In castles and manor houses, servants moved through hallways with torches, attending to fire maintenance, bedding adjustments, or security. In rural homes, simple oil lamps or rushlight candles illuminated work or communal storytelling. The flickering light and warmth created a comforting atmosphere, signaling that the night, while long and cold, was under human control. Sleep followed these carefully orchestrated routines, with physical comfort, light, and social activity blending seamlessly. Regional practices further shaped winter sleeping habits. In Scandinavian countries, partially subterranean homes, thick wooden walls, and layered bedding were common. Families often slept in the same room as animals, maximizing shared warmth. In alpine villages, multiple layers of straw, rushes, and furs insulated beds, and heated stones or braziers were sometimes placed near sleeping areas. Coastal regions dealt with dampness and wind, leading to the use of tightly sealed doors, layered clothing, and bedding arranged to block drafts. Even within similar climates, local customs, available materials, and social structures created a wide variety of approaches to winter sleep. Medical and herbal practices were closely linked to sleep routines. Physicians and herbalists of the time understood that long exposure to cold could lead to illness, and they recommended strategies to maintain warmth. Warm baths, herbal infusions, and spiced foods were used to promote circulation before bedtime. Herbs such as lavender, sage, and rosemary were placed near beds to aid relaxation, prevent illness, and provide a comforting aroma. Even rudimentary forms of heat therapy, like heated stones or warmed bedding, were applied based on an intuitive understanding of their effects on the human body. Sleep was considered both restorative and preventative, contributing to health in an environment where winter posed significant physiological stress. Animal companions were integral to these routines. Dogs and cats not only provided warmth, but also offered psychological comfort. The rhythmic breathing of animals, their proximity, and even the gentle sounds of movement contributed to a sense of security. Larger animals, such as pigs, goats, or chickens, shared heat and helped protect against predators. The presence of animals was both practical and comforting, creating an environment in which sleep was possible even during the harshest nights. Fire remained central to winter sleep in every household. Beyond the hearth, innovations in heating technology evolved over time. Clay or stone braziers, iron fire pans, and heated stones allowed for localized warmth, which could be moved to sleeping areas. The careful management of embers, rotation of coals, and attention to ventilation were essential skills. In castles, multiple fireplaces distributed heat across large chambers, and bed curtains or canopies helped retain warmth. In smaller homes, every ember was precious, and families developed precise routines for fire maintenance, ensuring that warmth persisted through the night. Sleep positions and bedding arrangements were deliberate. Curled postures, layering of blankets, and strategic placement of feet and head all contributed to retaining heat. Noble households often used furs and pillows to insulate specific parts of the body, while peasant families relied on shared body warmth and layered straw. Monastic communities employed austere bedding, yet communal arrangements ensured that warmth was distributed equitably. Across all levels of society, medieval people understood the physiology of sleep and applied practical measures to maximize comfort in cold conditions. The psychological environment of winter nights also influenced sleep. Extended darkness could evoke fear of the unknown, from wandering predators to supernatural forces. Charms, prayers, and ritual gestures provided both symbolic and psychological protection, helping people relax and achieve rest. Storytelling, communal warmth, and predictable routines reduced anxiety, demonstrating an intuitive understanding of the mind-body connection. Sleep was not merely the absence of activity. It was an intentional state facilitated by comfort, security, and preparation. Children and infants were given special consideration. Swaddling, layering, and positioning near adults or fires ensured warmth and protection. Warm herbal drinks were sometimes used to encourage relaxation and circulation. In monastic or convent settings, novices received similar care, balancing spiritual discipline with practical survival needs. The attention to the young reflects the centrality of sleep as a communal and intergenerational concern. Survival depended on ensuring that the most vulnerable were cared for, and sleep routines were adjusted accordingly. Travelers and pilgrims faced particular challenges. Inns and temporary shelters offered limited warmth, shared bedding, and intermittent fires. Knowledge of winter survival layering, strategic use of clothing, and reliance on animal warmth was essential. Travel during extreme winter nights was dangerous, and preparation was critical. Travelers often carried their own bedding or fire-starting materials, and coordinated with companions to share warmth. Their experience highlights the universality of winter sleep adaptations across medieval society, regardless of social class or location. Finally, medieval winter sleep was shaped by an interplay of survival, ritual, and social coordination. Long nights, extreme cold, and the threat of illness demanded careful preparation. Layered bedding, fire management, animal warmth, clothing, nutrition, and hygiene all contributed to physical comfort. Rituals, prayers, charms, and communal storytelling provided spiritual and psychological protection. Social coordination ensured equitable distribution of warmth and safety across family and community members. Medieval sleep was a holistic practice, reflecting an intimate understanding of both human physiology and the environment. Even small gestures mattered. Adjusting a blanket, moving a heated stone, closing a shutter, or offering a warm cup of broth could transform the quality of sleep. Communities shared knowledge, skills, and rituals to endure winter, passing them down through generations. From castles to cottages, monasteries to remote homesteads, medieval Europeans developed a sophisticated approach to winter rest, blending practicality, culture, and care. Sleep was not simply rest. It was an essential survival strategy, a deliberate, collaborative, and deeply human response to the harsh realities of winter life. As winter stretched across medieval Europe, the night was both a challenge and an opportunity. It was a time for rest, reflection, and ritual, but also a test of endurance against cold, darkness, and the uncertainty of the natural world. By the time the final section of this exploration begins, it becomes clear that medieval people approached sleep as a holistic practice, one that involved not only the physical body, but also social bonds, spiritual well-being, and environmental mastery. Their strategies were intricate, evolved over generations, and deeply intertwined with daily life. In the largest castles, the winter bedroom was a carefully orchestrated sanctuary. Nobles relied on the combined effect of architecture, bedding, and attendance to survive the coldest nights. Canopies and heavy curtains enclosed beds, reducing drafts and creating microclimates. Feather mattresses, layered blankets, and furs insulated the body, while heated stones or metal pans radiated warmth directly into the sleeping area. Attendants rotated embers from the hearth, added logs, and adjusted bedding to maintain consistent warmth. Even the placement of furniture played a role. Benches, footstools, and chests were arranged to block cold drafts or reflect heat from the fire. Such households demonstrated an advanced understanding of thermal dynamics, showing that medieval people, even without modern technology, had a remarkable command over the forces of nature. Smaller homes, including peasant cottages and rural dwellings, relied on communal warmth and practical ingenuity. Families huddled together on pallets of straw and rushes, often layering cloth and animal hides for insulation. Animals such as dogs, pigs, and chickens contributed both warmth and a sense of security, as predators prowled nearby and fires needed constant tending. Windows and doors were carefully sealed, furniture strategically placed, and bedding rotated or adjusted to maximize heat retention. These households displayed a profound, intuitive understanding of survival principles. Even with minimal resources, medieval families found ways to create warmth, comfort, and security during the harshest months. Fire management remained central to medieval winter life. Across social classes, the hearth was the heart of the home. Fires were maintained throughout the night in castles, cottages, and monasteries. Embers were transported in iron pans or stone containers to heated stones or bed warmers, providing localized warmth for sleeping areas. Even small braziers or fireboxes helped conserve heat. Knowledge of fire behavior, careful rotation of embers, and attention to ventilation were essential skills passed down through families and communities. In monasteries, multiple hearths and communal fire tending ensured that warmth was evenly distributed and survival was maintained despite austerity. Clothing and sleep positioning were equally essential. Headwear, socks, cloaks, and layered nightshirts were standard, particularly in wealthier households. Peasants improvised with available materials, combining scraps of cloth, fur, and bedding layers. Sleep posture mattered. Curling the body minimized heat loss. Tucking limbs under blankets retained warmth, and strategic body positioning distributed heat within shared beds. Knowledge of physiology, while empirical rather than scientific, was evident in these strategies. Medieval people observed the effects of cold and warmth carefully, applying practical measures to optimize comfort and prevent illness. Monastic and religious practices deeply influenced sleep routines. Monks and nuns observed night vigils, prayers, and meditation schedules, often requiring some members to remain awake for long periods. Austere bedding and limited clothing made these nights challenging, but communal arrangements, proximity to fires, and careful rotation ensured survival. Sleep was therefore integrated with spiritual discipline, reflecting a worldview in which physical endurance, mental focus, and spiritual devotion were inseparable. Even lay people incorporated spiritual elements into sleep. Prayers before bed, charms, and herbal remedies created a sense of protection against both physical and supernatural dangers. Nutrition was a critical factor in enduring long, cold nights. Hearty meals provided internal warmth, while specific herbs and spices supported circulation and general health. Broths, stews, porridges, and bread were staples, often consumed late in the evening to sustain energy during sleep. Leftovers were sometimes fed to animals, enhancing their warmth and indirectly improving human comfort. Even in monasteries, simple but calorie-dense meals supported both health and endurance. The interplay between diet, warmth, and sleep highlights a sophisticated understanding of holistic survival strategies. Sleep was not merely physical, but also psychological. Long nights, darkness, and isolation could evoke fear from predators, criminals, or supernatural forces. Charms, prayers, and rituals provided reassurance, creating a secure mental environment conducive to rest. Storytelling, communal gatherings, and music further reduced anxiety, fostering emotional well-being alongside physical comfort. The medieval approach to sleep demonstrates an intuitive grasp of the mind-body connection. Rest was facilitated by both environmental management and psychological preparation. Children were treated with special care, reflecting the central role of family in winter survival. Infants were swaddled and placed near adults or fires, ensuring warmth and protection. Warm drinks or herbal infusions encouraged relaxation and circulation. In convents and monasteries, novices received similar attention, blending spiritual discipline with practical survival measures. Ensuring that children were warm, safe, and comfortable was not simply an act of care. It was a matter of survival, and it reinforced social bonds and community cohesion. Travelers and pilgrims faced uniquely harsh challenges. Inns and temporary shelters offered minimal bedding and intermittent fires. Travelers relied on layered clothing, strategic positioning near heat sources, and sharing warmth with companions or animals. Preparation, experience, and adaptability were critical for survival. Travel during winter nights demanded knowledge of fire tending, bedding arrangement, and clothing, highlighting the universality of medieval winter sleep adaptations. Regional differences shaped sleeping customs across Europe. Northern Europe required extensive insulation, communal sleeping arrangements, and animal warmth. Alpine regions contended with altitude and snow, using multiple layers of straw, rushes, and furs, as well as heated stones. Coastal and lowland regions dealt with dampness and wind, emphasizing tightly sealed homes, layered bedding, and strategic fire placement. Despite regional variation, the underlying principles remained consistent: warmth, protection, vigilance, and social coordination. Winter festivals and cultural rituals influenced sleep patterns as well. Feasts, religious observances, and storytelling sessions often delayed bedtime, creating a sense of communal warmth and security. Seasonal celebrations, like the solstice, Advent, and Christmas, involved extended vigils and large fires, offering both symbolic and practical protection against the long, cold nights. Sleep followed these celebrations, aided by the residual warmth of fire, the comfort of family or community, and the psychological reassurance of ritual. The cumulative effect of these strategies reflects a deeply integrated approach to survival. Medieval people combined architecture, bedding, clothing, fire management, nutrition, spiritual practices, social coordination, and psychological preparation to endure winter nights. Each factor reinforced the others. Warmth from fires, bedding, and animals complemented clothing and diet. Rituals and storytelling reinforced mental comfort and social cohesion. Vigilance ensured safety and protection. Sleep was thus not passive, but a deliberate, structured, and communal activity, critical to survival in a challenging environment. Innovation and adaptation were constant. Over time, heating technology improved, bedding materials diversified, and clothing became more specialized. Canopy beds, bed curtains, furs, feather mattresses, and heated stones reflected evolving understanding of heat conservation. Even small changes, such as arranging furniture to block drafts, rotating bedding, or using herbs for aroma and medicinal purposes, demonstrated ingenuity and empirical knowledge. Medieval people continuously refined their strategies, combining tradition, observation, and practical experimentation to improve sleep quality and survival. Modern observers can learn much from these practices. while contemporary life offers central heating, insulation, and climate control. Medieval strategies emphasize the importance of routine, social coordination, and preparation. Layering, strategic use of heat sources, attention to diet, and incorporation of psychological comfort are timeless principles. Medieval sleep practices remind us that rest is not merely passive, but a holistic process, integrating body, mind, and environment. The integration of spiritual, cultural, and practical measures highlights a worldview in which survival, community, and ritual were inseparable. Charms, prayers, and herbs protected both mind and body. Storytelling and music strengthened social bonds and reduced anxiety. Communal warmth, shared knowledge, and strategic attention to the environment ensured survival across generations. Sleep was, in every sense, a collaborative and intentional activity. Ultimately, medieval winter sleep reflects human ingenuity and adaptability. The combination of layered bedding, fire management, clothing, nutrition, spiritual practices, social coordination, and vigilance created a comprehensive system for enduring the harshest conditions. From noble castles to peasant cottages, from monasteries to remote villages, people developed strategies that balanced physical, psychological, and spiritual needs. Sleep was not merely the absence of activity. It was a critical, intentional, and highly adaptive practice. By examining these practices, we gain insight into the daily lives of medieval people, their fears, hopes, and resilience. Long winter nights shaped not only rest, but also family structure, social organization, and cultural expression. They fostered innovation, collaboration, and the careful observation of the natural world. The medieval approach to sleep reminds us that rest, warmth, and protection are deeply human concerns, shaped by environment, community, and imagination. As the final embers of the medieval hearth glowed, the sleepers, layered in blankets, furs, and feather beds, drifted into rest. Fires crackled, animals breathed softly, and the world outside remained dark and cold. Within these spaces, humans had mastered the art of survival, blending body, mind, and spirit into an intricate ritual of winter sleep. It was a quiet, enduring testament to ingenuity, care, and resilience, a tradition that, though largely forgotten, still whispers through the pages of history, inviting modern listeners to imagine the stillness of long, cold nights and the warmth of beds shared, fires tended, and communities bound together in survival. Medieval winter sleep, in all its complexity, reminds us that rest is not merely a biological necessity, but a cultural, social, and psychological achievement. It was a deliberate practice, honed over centuries, designed to protect, nurture, and sustain life through the most challenging nights of the year. And as we in the modern era slip beneath our own blankets, perhaps, we can take a quiet moment to appreciate the profound understanding, care, and ingenuity of those who slept long ago in the heart of winter, when darkness ruled the night and every ember mattered.